Welcome, CB, to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We got to see you last year at the LA Times Festival of Books for a little teeny tiny interview, but we're thrilled to have you back as we start to talk about Not Your Backup, which will come out on June 4th, just the day after this airs, actually.
Oh my gosh, that will be really exciting. Actually times up really perfectly. I actually got to touch the advanced copies for the first time last week at Y'all West, which, due to the fun time jumps of podcasting,
well, actually, it's been about a month ago.
Right. But yeah, it was really interesting just to hold it for the first time and see it in print. Granted, the advanced copies have typos since I went through and did all the passwords with the typos, but it's fun. It's fun. It's great that it exists. It's in physical form. It hasn't quite felt real till now, but now it's a real book, or will be very soon, or tomorrow for your listeners and readers.
There is something about holding that physical copy, even if you see it, even if it's on your tablet as an ebook, it's like there's nothing like that paperback when it gets there.
Yeah.
Now, Not Your Backup is book 3 in the Sidekick Squad series. And for those who haven't experienced this series or heard of it, tell us what this series is all about.
Sure. It is about a group of queer teens that take on a corrupt government superhero agency. And they live in this sort of post-dystopian world where superheroes are kind of treated like celebrities. And there's a shadowy government organizations and mysterious heroes, League of Heroes, that kind of dictates who gets to be a hero and who gets to be a villain. And our protagonists all kind of uncover this huge conspiracy, and then they work together to build a resistance and take it down.
It's quite the world that you've built here. I mean, you hit so many things there: dystopian U.S. future, superheroes, villains. What was your inspiration for all of this?
So I've always been fascinated by kind of that post-apocalyptic or dystopian worlds, but a lot of the media that I've read mostly focuses on kind of when you're in the middle of the disaster, when you're in the middle of the catastrophe, when everything is going wrong, how are people struggling to survive? So I really wanted to see a world that was, so this is more of like a solar punk take where the world has started to move forward, where, it's 100 years after all of these disasters have happened. So kind of the impetus for the superpowers in my book is a really extremely intense solar flare that catalyzes a latent gene in people. And then after the flare, which knocks out a bunch of nuclear power plants, also it starts kind of the chain reaction of a bunch of environmental disasters. So 100 years later, the world has kind of the governments of the world have kind of shifted and changed. There's been wars, there's been fights over resources. So the United States is now part of the North American Collective, which is the entire continent of North America, which is now the habitable places are, there's 24 regions, which is kind of what's left of the states. So there's different areas all across North America, which are now the regions in which people live and continue to move forward with their amazing technology and hover tech and all of this amazing clean technology. But at the same time, you have all of these high-tech cities, but outside of those regions, everything else is the unmaintained lands. So the government's claiming there's radiation danger and don't venture out. But of course, our heroes are what the government tells us isn't necessarily true. So a lot of actually the fun of writing Not Your Backup is that it actually kind of one of my working titles was Not Your Road Trip, because there's a lot of road tripping in this book.
Yeah, I noticed there's a bit of a road trip in the sneak peek that I got to read too. They're out on this road trip to essentially on a mission.
Right. Yeah, there's the heist in the beginning of the very first chapter. But yeah, there's a lot of fun. We get to see a little bit more of the country outside of the cities in this book, so that's exciting.
Now, each of the books deals with one of the main heroes, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or the sidekicks, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
given the name, given the titles of the book, but they're really the heroes. In Not Your Backup, we focus on Emma, who is
Mm-hmm.
really the only one of them without the powers. What's kind of happening to our heroes this time out?
So at the end of Not Your Villain, we have destroyed the registry, which is the big name of everyone who's ever registered with powers that Captain Orion was planning to use to kidnap people and use for experiments. And there's really, at that point, our heroes have been looking for the resistance the whole time, and they realize, they find a mysterious group that's been leaving messages on encrypted channels. But then at the end of the book, or they realize that this is actually like a group of nerds that have been joining together to watch banned like movies like Star Wars and Harry Potter and stuff. So they realize that they need to start the resistance. So that's where we are at the beginning of Not Your Backup, where Emma and Bells are back in Nevada, and they are kind of in the midst of this fledgling resistance group. Meanwhile, Jess and Abby are at the Villains Guild hideout in the Rockies, and they're trying to corral all the other metahumans into taking action. So the beginning of the book, we're kind of everyone has different goals, but then they all come together. But yeah, it's more about like building the resistance and finding. For Emma, it's her journey in finding who she is, and really, she's a very natural leader. She loves coming up with plans, and she's definitely a Gryffindor. She's the first to like jump in and try to take action. Her default is like fight me, but she also is, as you mentioned, she doesn't have powers. And so when she's trying to take a more active role in the resistance, she kind of meets, butts heads with a few of the other members as they have different ideas about who is and who isn't part of the resistance.
She just needs to remind them that Batman didn't have powers either. He just had a really good utility belt and brains. So she could definitely fill that role. What's been the driving force behind deciding the type of character that you have at the forefront of each book? Because the three books have very different, distinct character types and personalities, and just everything about them is just they're just very different from each other.
Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, I wanted to tell this story about, this fun adventure story with queer protagonists. So each book would center another one of them in the main four. So and then after Not Your Backup, there's one more book, which will be Abby's story. And so she will round out the quartet. But each of they have very different personalities, but it's been interesting writing their stories because each of them are on their own journey and what makes them a hero, and finding how do they define success, and how do other people see them, and how do they see themselves. So for each story, because we're moving forward in time, as we get to see, who is really, it's been interesting because all four books will fit together with as a series, but in each book, everyone gets to have their own journey.
Which I really like, because we've been introduced to all of them all the way back, back in the first book, but then they get to their own story, which could essentially be read as a standalone if you wanted to, I guess. Although reading all of them together is much better. What was the bigger challenge, to come up with the trajectory of these four diverse characters, or to build this alternate universe of the U.S.? Or were they kind of equal challenges?
I feel like the challenge for me is I'm not like a great outliner, or I haven't ever really been a planner. So I've always been more of the pantser in the writing style. So when writing a series, so when I wrote Not Your Sidekick, I didn't know up until I think I was about 50,000 words in when I realized that I could not basically solve the problem within in the next in that one book. And I realized, because when I pitched it, it was one book, and then I was like, well, I really love all of these characters. There's a bigger story here behind, that I've introduced, and I will need more than one book to solve it. And so from the get-go, I knew the next story after Jess would be Belle's, because you get into like the backstory of the metahuman training and the Heroes League of Heroes, and so kind of I think overall just planning a series is really challenging. Some people are great at it, where they're very detailed outlines. They know from the very beginning to the very end, like what the key points are going to be. And so as I was writing book one, I kind of had a panic attack where I was like, oh no, I have to figure out what's going to happen in each of the books. And then as I restructured kind of things, and then writing book two and then three, it's kind of come up to the point where I'm working on book four. And now like everything one of the reasons why it took me a longer time between books. So Not Your Villain came out in 2017. And Not Your Backup is coming out in 2019. So I didn't have a book come out last year because I was still working on kind of crafting the storyline, because whatever I did or didn't do in book three would determine what would happen in book four. So everything had to like fall into place, and I had to like figure out a lot of stuff. So it took, it was challenging, but I think, it's still challenging, but that's part of the joy of writing, is to figure out how to tell the story you want to tell.
If you do a series again, do you think you'll try to do outlines more in the upfront, or now that you've had this experience, do you kind of know how to do it and keep your pantser ways going on?
I don't know if I'll ever I feel like with each book, I'm like, oh, do I know how to write a novel now? But like every book is its own challenge. I do have a better sense of like, okay, how do I plot as a pantser? I'm plotting for pantsers, and like learning how to like, for me, I just tend to think of it as like an outline, like a roadmap, where I have these destinations I want to hit, but I'm not committed to like, I don't have to see everything. And if I go off track or take a different route, that's okay as well. So as long as I kind of get the same, like it's all in the journey of how I get there. Mm-hmm. And then the destinations that I pick along the way, if I get them or not, that's cool. I kind of have these benchmarks that I want to reach, but I really like thinking of the framework in which I think about my books as a roadmap. So I'll try to plan out my, all the cities I want to visit, but I'm open to discovering places along the way and kind of building up on that.
Mm-hmm. How does the pantser sort of method work while you're world building, or do you try to at least before you start writing know this is my world, this is what's happened, this is what the US looks like now and how all of it works, or does that come organically as you go as well?
I actually thought like really early on established the world and what it looked like. I drew a map of like which countries were left and what alliances were made, and probably much more detail than you'll ever see in the books, because basically I plotted out what happened in that World War III and what areas were no longer habitable and all of these things, and all the different lines of like, I probably spent way too much time figuring out like the socioeconomical ramifications of which country is like now allying with what country and which countries refuse to join a union, or and they're all new countries. So there's this whole like political backstory of like which country fought, which alliance was at war at which alliance, and what's still happening overseas, and some of which you'll see, but it is the world itself. I've always enjoyed world building, and I think it's really fun to come up with once I wrote book one, where I established like how do the powers work. Every power level is different. For example, like the A class, B class, or C class, like depending on how. Basically, I wanted all the metahumans in my world their powers basically are dependent on like they have a limited number of time per day that they can use their powers. So once they've used it, then they can't use it for the next 24-hour period. So it's a different sort of look at superpowers and abilities because you have to be more mindful about how you use your powers. And then, and so that was an element that I established early on. But overall, I think, like, for me, world building, like, there's some details I discovered along the way, but I pretty much plotted the world building, which is a funny, like, and it's interesting to think about, like, even though I do consider myself a pantser, how much of the series I did very much envision out from an early stage. So like some of the confrontations and the fight scenes and the stuff that, like, I've been planning one particular scene in book 3 since book 1, and I didn't get to do it until, so that was like a fun way to be like, oh yes, I'm finally get to like write the scene that I've been waiting for. But I've had a lot of these like moments in my head and just like planning it out and getting the opportunity to like, okay, yes, now I'm getting to that chapter. I'm getting to that point in the whole series where we're getting, it's coming full circle. So that's very satisfying.
Sounds like you'd have a lot of bonus material too if you ever wanted to release it, of all the stuff that you've got of the world itself and the disaster and how it's split up.
Yeah, I mean, potentially I have a whole timeline that I could release. And then I did these fun, for Not Your Villain, I did all the deleted scenes. Well, deleted as far as they were cut for length, but I still consider it part of the story, the canon. So those are an extra that are available on my website. I'll probably do something similar for backup, but I'm not at that stage yet.
Right. It's good to know about the villain extras. I'll be going to check those out.
Yeah, they're fun. They're all in one PDF, and my book designer, CB Messer, was amazing, and she formatted them the same way as the book. Because we had a lot of extra art as well, because she does these amazing like chapter headers for each chapter, and she's so talented and amazing designing the covers and the interior of the book to really capture that feel. And so Not Your Villain actually in edits went from it. Yeah, it was cut a lot. So I was it's really sad as a writer to kind of like see these scenes go. But as far as yes, and my editors were great about like. This scene is great, but it kind of slows down the pacing, or like this scene takes us in a different tone or direction, and like while they're great, they don't fit in the story at that moment and kind of take us away from the main action. So I understand why they had to go, and yes, the story is stronger overall, but I like them as a extra.
Yeah, we've all gotten used to those on DVDs over time, so there's really no reason books can't have them too.
Yeah, it is a fun extra to have the deleted scenes.
So you mentioned one more book in the series, the 4th one. Is that going to be it for these heroes?
Yeah, I can't say for sure that like the door is completely closed, but for this arc, this storyline, that will be the series. It will be completed with Abby's book.
We could treat it like the Marvel universe. Now, phase 1 is over, and there can be a phase 2 eventually. Once you figure out what that is. What got you started in writing?
I love like telling stories, and I think I was like very young when I tried like writing a story for myself. I had like a old notebook that I would scribble this adventure story in when I was like in 6th grade, and then I'd kind of start, and in every recess I'd pick it up or I'd work on it when I was supposed to be doing homework or other stuff in class. And so I've always wanted to tell stories. I didn't really think of it seriously as a career. And then after college, I went to school for science, and so I was going to get a PhD and do all this stuff. And I, ended up going a different route, and really writing has been a journey where it ties back to, and I guess like the Sidekick Squad series and the titles where we're all, the titles are all about like, hey, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not the person that you're claiming that I should be or expect me to be. it comes back to where, as a queer woman of color, I didn't really see a lot of myself in books growing up. And so what I really hoped to write was, like, especially when I was writing Sidekick for the first time, was I wanted to write a book for, like, my 16-year-old self. Mm-hmm. So this is the book I wanted to read, and I wanted it to exist. And so writing, and then I also just like telling stories. So I wanted the stories to be fun. I wanted them to be happy. There's drama in them, but overall I wanted to see, like, kids like myself and kids who looked like me and other kids that reflect the world that we live in, because trans kids exist, asexual kids exist, mentally ill kids exist, and there aren't enough stories where they get to be part of something that's just like a superhero adventure or something fun and fantastic like this. And so I hope, and I think there definitely now in the past 5-10 years there have been a lot more stories, mm-hmm. and I think that's great. So I'm just really excited that now people are writing more and more and reading more and more, and there's a lot of great books to come.
And one of the things I don't want to knock the coming out story, because those are very important and very needed. But in these books, that's not really part of it. I mean, in some places there is, but this is a much bigger adventure these teenagers are on that just doesn't revolve around their sexuality so much. There's so much more going on, which I think is awesome and gives everybody something different to read.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I want us to have the breadth and of different types of genres and stories that there are for, like, able-bodied cis heterosexual people. Like, I want there to be, like, so many stories to choose from, and so and I really love. I think there's a lot of power in having joyful stories, mm-hmm. as well, and stories where, yes, like, sexuality is a part of it, but who I am is not just my sexuality. Like, every person is multitudes, where who you are is made up of so many things, like your passions, your dreams, your hopes, your hobbies, your friends, like, who you are as a person isn't just one thing, and we're all. I love, like, being able to explore that and getting to see, one of the things I just, writing is that I want people to see that, like, people in the LGBTQ community are, like, fully nuanced people that get to be complicated and have flaws and go on adventures or fall in love or discover more about themselves in the way that all straight people can.
Well said. I like that for sure. Who were some of your author influences as you got started on your writing journey?
So I really loved the Harry Potter series growing up. As a huge influence for me. That was one of the first kind of ways I started writing, was Harry Potter fan fiction, because I love that world so much. And just I read so much fantasy, like Ursula Le Guin, Diane Duane, Owen Colfer, like tons of fantasy, Jane Yolen. I started to read a lot more widely, but it was like, I think when I was a kid, there was a point when I would, like, go to the YA section or just read, like, everything in the library. So I would pretty much read everything, but I tended to love, like, fantasy and sci-fi the most.
Nice. And you now you get to write your own.
Yeah, I'm really lucky.
Is there a genre you want to branch into as you close up the Sidekick series?
I'm excited to write more fantasy. So the Sidekick Squad is more sci-fi, speculative. So I'm working on some fantasy stuff. I'm excited to share it. I have some contemporary stuff. I have a short story coming out next year in the next All Out anthology. So that'll be fun. It's like a very fluffy high school romance that's just set in, like, there's the only magic is the friendship and the romance. So,
Sometimes that's all you need, though.
Yeah. So it's fun because when I was writing it, I hadn't written like just contemporary in a long time, so that was really fun to try and explore that. Plus, I got to put a lot of puns in there, so it's all good.
You seem to travel a lot. I feel like every time I see you on social media, it's like, I'm going to this event, or here I am at this event. Come see me over here. What drives you to be out on the road so much?
So I like the opportunity to like meet readers, especially like I really love, I go to a lot of, I live in Los Angeles, and I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to go to a lot of events that are fairly local. I also think it's really important to travel when I have the opportunity to, and I'm lucky that I've been able to, and sometimes I will just commit to doing it out of my own pocket because I want to meet readers in those areas. So I love, yeah, I already said it. I love meeting readers. But especially in places where you don't get a lot of, LGBTQ resources, or teens don't necessarily get to see a lot of authors or books with this content come their way, and getting to meet, teens in, small towns, or getting to meet people, or even I do a lot of web chats. And so that's fun, chatting with like libraries or classrooms through the power of the internet, which is amazing. But part of like being like on panels and having these conversations is important to me, just because like, I get to share with people that might not have heard of my books before, or are just learning about it for the first time. And so that's always a very special moment to me when someone's like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly what I've been looking for. I didn't know it exists, and now I do. And so that's very meaningful. And sometimes I get to meet people who have already read the books, and that's very important to me. And that's part of the most rewarding things to me as a writer, is knowing that like your work has made an impact on someone, whether it's just making them smile, or to the depth of having someone like I've like cried over several really long emails, just because sometimes people are like really sweet and talk about like, oh, this is my coming out experience, or like, getting to like, for me, like if so, like I want people to see that they're valid. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that someone else has read my work and recognized themselves, that's one of the like most rewarding things I've ever done. Mm-hmm. I was in Seattle recently, earlier this year, and one of the events I did was with the Seattle Public Library, where we went to LGBT Youth Center, and that was really powerful, just to like hang out with kids and chat with them, and what are they looking forward to, as far as like, hey, like what's powerful to me, like what's fun to me, like getting kids to like, and a lot of this is like stuff that I totally resonate with, when they like connect with a character on TV, or are upset that that character got killed off in one season or whatever because of TV. But they, it's always great to chat with people. Everyone's always going through something.
Yeah, for sure. So we've hinted a little bit about some stuff that's coming up for you. You're working on Sidekick 4. You've got a short story coming out next year. Anything else we should know about?
I'm also writing the new Ben 10 original graphic novels with Boom Studios and Cartoon Network. So one is already out. It's called The Truth Is Out There. It's where Ben 10 is part of the Cartoon Network show where Ben can turn into 10 different aliens. So it's fun. It's a fun middle grade romp. So I'm doing a number of those graphic novels with Boom. So those will be available throughout. I can't recall the dates off the top of my head, but another one is coming out in July, and then one more in October of this year, and then next year there will be some more coming as well.
What's it like writing for graphic novel? Because I mean that's a different sort of animal than a novel that is 60 or 70,000 words long.
Mm-hmm. It was definitely a new experience. It was a lot of fun trying a different medium. It like definitely writing a script goes differently, as far as and I catch myself like, oh, I'm being too descriptive. This is literally the only person who will see this is the artist, and it's also a great collaborative process. So it's really fun to work with the artists and editors and really like bring together this story that exists in its own medium. So it's like, it's not just me, the writer, but like what the artist is bringing and collaborating with them and getting to like, you know, I'll like write the dialogue and the action, and then they'll like imagine it in a certain way of like, oh, I didn't think of that. And that's really fun. So I really like the graphic novel format. I'm hoping to do more. And so I'm really excited to be working on these projects, and yeah, hopefully I'll be able to share more upcoming projects. Cool.
And speaking of, what is the best way for people to keep up with you online?
You can always find me on Twitter and Instagram at CBLEE_CBLEE, because it's double the trouble. My website is cb-lee.com, and then you can find more links to other ways you can connect with me. Usually Twitter and Instagram, where you can find me the most. But as far as, yeah, it's where you can connect with me on. And my website has like fun stuff. I try to update it with like writing resources and my upcoming events. And I also have a newsletter, which will have some special tidbits, probably like the deleted scenes, which is the very first place I offered the Not Your Villain extra scenes.
Very cool. Well, CB, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We wish you all the success with Not Your Backup when it comes out on June 4th.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited, and I hope everyone enjoys the book.